Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Torah study. We're learning Chassidus. Chassidus is a very unique genre of Torah study. Not just the written Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, and not just the oral Torah, which is the Talmud and the Mishnah given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and not even just the Kabbalah, which is the secret Torah given to Moses on Mount Sinai. The Kabbalah is the soul of Torah that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai together with the written Torah and the oral Torah and the 10 Commandments. Chassidus is an emerging wisdom. As we discussed in our recent seminar, Book Smart, it's only about 250 years old. Chabad Chassidus is applied Kabbalah. That's what it is. Chassidus has applied Kabbalah to ordinary folk like ourselves. When you read the Kabbalah, it's mostly unintelligible. But when you study Chassidus, it is practical, down to earth, often feeling like psychology, psychotherapy, or psychoanalysis, because it's so deeply personal to you, to me, and to your own relationships and your relationship with God, with yourself, with your spouse, with your kids, because when it's about you, it's a study of you. What we're learning here, I'm going to show you a picture for our friends on YouTube. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe means the previous Rebbe. He is the not our Rebbe, who's Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, but it's his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, the 6th Rebbe of Chabad. There were 7 Rebbes of Chabad, the first being the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. We're learning Tanya. But each one of those Rebbes would teach Chassidus. This is Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who suffered terribly at the hands of the Soviets, the communists, who forbade and outlawed the study of Torah entirely. They were anti-theists. The communists were potentially the most successful anti-Semites of Jewish history. Even though all anti-Semites failed, the communists were potentially the most successful because they went not after our bodies, they went after our schools. No other anti-Semite was as efficient as the communists. The Romans, was it the Greeks? The Greeks got close to that. That's why we have the dreidel, because they too were after our schools. The dreidel reminds us that they were after our schools, because they would study Torah. When there were Greek soldiers would come, they would play dreidel and say, we're not studying in the caves, But the communists, by banning Jewish schools, what they did is that they create over 70 years, ending in 1990, they created a generation of Jews who were entirely ignorant of their heritage. When you meet a Russian Jew today, they'll typically tell you, I never had a bar mitzvah, probably didn't have a bris. I know that I'm a Jew. I remember my grandmother eating crackers on Easter time, but that's it. That's what they'll tell you, because they are entirely ignorant of their Jewish identity. So the previous Rebbe was the enemy number 1 of the Russians, the communists. They called them Schneersonists. The Schneersonists. There was a special unit of the KGB devoted to uprooting any vestige of Jewish life. It was called the NKVD. It had another name, I believe. NKVD was...
that's the precursor to the KGB.
No, but there was a special unit, I think it was the GPU, maybe the GPU.
That preceded the NKVD.
That was a unit devoted to going after the Jews. It was manned by Jews who understood Judaism. They were communist Jews. And they understood what the sensitivities of the Jews were. So they would infiltrate into Farbrengens, into Torah classes, into the shuls. They would make like they were davening, and they would rat out anyone that was there, and everybody was fearful of everybody else.
There was a group within them called the Yevetskaya.
That's what I'm talking about. Yevseksia. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
And those were Jews themselves,
right,
who felt that Judaism was the enemy of communism.
Right. So that is the unit that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, for example, when the previous Rebbe was arrested on multiple occasions, but when he was arrested one time, the people that arrested him there were 2 Jews by the name of Lulav and Nachmanson. And they said to him, they called him Rebbe. And they said, Rebbe, my grandfather, one of them said, my grandfather was a chassid of your grandfather. And therefore, just like he carried your grandfather's luggage, I will carry your luggage as well into jail. It was really, really messed up. Eventually, You know, when the previous Rebbe became Rebbe, his father passed away in 1920. So the Rebbe Rashab that we learned, V'yodaita Moskva, the one I wrote the book about, the Maimah was delivered in 1896 or 1897. That was the V'yodaita Moskva discourse. Jeffrey, you should study that one. V'yodaita Moskva, the book I wrote. But that discourse was in 1896-97. The fifth Rebbe passed away in 1920 in Rostov, where he's buried. In Rostov, southern Russia, near Ukraine. But when he passed away, before he passed away, he says to his son-in-law, his son, the previous Rebbe, he gave him a blessing that he should be successful in spreading Yiddishkeit in Russia, and may it be b'chesed v'rachmah, may it be in kindness and in mercy. And the previous Rebbe said that blessing lasted 7 years until 1927, when he was arrested and brutally abused, and they crippled him. Eventually he was on death row. He was on death row, and due to international pressure and a divine intervention, he was then released from death row. The year was 1940 when he came to America. Now he passed away in 1950. So those 10 years he was crippled in America. He was handicapped, but he was still teaching and writing Chassidus. His son-in-law, our Rebbe, was already in the wings, really being his secretary and assistant and everything under his name, but he was really doing a lot of things. For example, the Hayom Yom that we study every day was written by the Rebbe, but in the name, he ghost authored it in the name of the previous Rebbe. He basically collected from his father-in-law's writings, but even though he was the publisher. There were many such publications that the Rebbe was doing. Now, why is this important? Because these discourses that we're about to learn in this book over here, Chassidic Discourses, are teachings that the previous Rebbe published in the years 1941 through 1945. Some of the darkest years in all of Jewish history. The previous Rebbe was already in America. Remember, he came in 1940. These are the last few years of his last decade of his life. And he had just barely survived the Russians. Meanwhile, we all know what's going on in Germany and in Europe. Meanwhile, American Jewry, so Russian Jewry is being decimated because they're going after the schools. European Jewry is being decimated because they're going after their bodies. And American Jewry is suffering because they're going after their souls. What happened to American Jews who came to Ellis Island? To our grandparents, right? They threw the tefillin overboard in the harbor. They left Shabbos back in Poland. They left kosher behind, and they became Americanized. These Maimarim, these discourses that we're about to learn now over the next months, are discourses that are speaking to a comatose Jewish people.
And by then, that wave of destruction would have come right to whereabout he was, but he got out before.
Yeah, but he was already in New York City.
Yeah.
The question is, you jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, because he came out of America. He came out of Europe, Russia, into America from the physical persecution of Europe into the spiritual persecution of United States of America, right? And that's with that context.
Doesn't look happy.
Okay, so
We know why.
he's serious. He was very, very serious, and he had lots to be serious about. If you were listening to what I just said,
That's what I'm saying.
he had a lot to be serious about. He was talking to a broken generation. In fact,
Absolutely.
if he'd be happy, I'd be concerned, because the Jewish people were suffering so very much.
It all tells
And it's
right
these
there.
discourses. He's got the story of the Jewish people written all over his
Always
face.
says.
Now, if you look at the book of contents, look at the contents of here, you'll see that this is book 2.
Yeah.
This is book 2
Right.
because book 1 is completely out of print. That's why it took me a long time to get the book. I just said, to heck with it. We're going ahead. We're going to order book 2. Thank you, Joe Fertig and Naomi, for underwriting the cost of this project. And you'll notice that these are shorter discourses because they were written to a distracted generation. They were actually published, these teachings, in a publication that the Rebbe would actually edit, called Akriya V'Akadusha, which translates as Reading and Holiness. Reading and Holiness. It was like a weekly publication of Torah wisdom and articles. And the motto of this publication was La'alter L'Tshuva, La'alter L'Geula, which means immediate repentance will lead to immediate redemption. The Jewish people were in need of immediate redemption. And I believe, as you've heard from me probably many times, that Mashiach is here. We are living already in Messianic times. What that means is Mashiach is not an event. It's not a switch that you go from dark to light. It's a consciousness. It's an awareness that infiltrates every single aspect of our lives, from scientific research and development to technology to communication to transportation to relationships to parenting to marriage to personal awareness and spirituality. Every aspect of our lives is now being imbued with awareness and with consciousness. To international relationships and banking. It's a topic for another time, but I'm very much convinced that we already are living in Messianic times, and we're in the middle of the rise of the dawn. We're not in the thick of night anymore, as we were back then. So let's now turn to page 225. Again, we're in book 2. If anybody would like to buy this book, you can buy it online from Kahot Publications, or you can find it for free on the computer on our website. I'm going to try to post it in the comments. I think Winston is out there in Indonesia. I don't think Amazon delivers to Indonesia. But
Singapore noodles.
Here. This is discourse number 27. Okay. So I'm gonna post a link now to YouTube, so you'll be able to follow along wherever you are. I see Terry's in Atlanta, Fran, I think you're in Northern Florida, and anybody else, Western, Eastern, Palm Beach Gardens, you can follow along with the link we just sent. Okay, good. Now remember, these discourses are written to a distracted generation. American Jews, they were working, 7 days a week, 6 days a week. To wear a beard was like total self-sacrifice. To wear a yarmulke was a major thing in the streets in the 1940s. Right? I mean, who wore tzitzis out of their... if you were... Everybody spoke Yiddish, of course, but if you were like keeping Shabbos, you were an anomaly. It was so difficult. People were struggling to make a living. If you had a roof over your head and you were able to raise your children without moving too many times, without losing your home, you were a good parent. It was about survival. Right? The next generation spoke English and was Americanized. They moved out to the suburbs, right? That's probably where you guys grew up.
That's right.
Yeah, we're
Right?
here too.
Right.
We're the older generation.
In the next generation, we're not getting into the psychology of it. Let's go straight into it.
Okay.
The idea here was about survival, because our people were literally being decimated all over Europe and Asia. And in America, it wasn't much different in the spiritual Holocaust that we were experiencing.
They had to assimilate, right?
I respectfully disagree, but vehemently disagree.
But that's what happened.
That's what they thought.
Perception.
They thought that to survive, they needed to assimilate. They married Jews and they spoke Jewish, but they thought that they needed to assimilate in order to survive because their faith was weak. But these discourses now, Chuck, these discourses were there to nourish a generation whose souls were on life support, metaphorically speaking, to provide them with the courage, with the hope, with the vision that they needed to hold on tight to their faith, not to think that their fate was in the hand of their employer. They were scared, but to realize that their fate is in the hands of the Almighty God.
Just one more portion.
Yes.
To that picture is that New York American intellectual life and cultural life was dominated by the New York Jewish intellectuals and the Hollywood
Also Jews.
Also all Jews.
Well, they started out
there
in
were
New York, and they
German
went-
And this would have been written 41,
Assimilated, yeah.
42.
The first, yeah.
This would have been written 41, 42.
Through years 41 through 45. This probably was 43.
Just
Irving
as the
Howe,
Nazis
Norman
were rolling
Conference.
through Ukraine.
Just as when?
The Nazis
Sonic.
were rolling through
Right.
Ukraine.
Okay, so you're getting a historical perspective.
Yeah.
1943. Okay. This discourse here, again, all by the Frierdiker Rebbe, page 225. Mah Tovu Alecha Yaakov, Mishkan Yisecha Yisrael. It's something which is basic foundational verse in Torah. It comes from, how goodly are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling place is Israel. This verse comes from Bilam, the greatest anti-Semite, the most spiritually conscious of all anti-Semites. The Torah tells us that he was equivalent in his prophecy to Moses. So this guy would talk to God. He was spiritually up there. He was in the dark side, but he was up there. He was the one that was hired by one of the last enemies of the Jews on the way to the promised land. When this guy realized that he wasn't able to fight the Jews with conventional weapons, he hired Bilam for weapons of mass destruction, for unconventional weapons, which was to fight the Jews with their weapon, which is not the sword, but the mouth. The voice is the hands are the hands of Esau, and the voice is the voice of Jacob, right? Weapons is for Esau, it's for the Gentiles, but the prayer is for the Jews, right? So he realized maybe we got to fight the Jews with prayer, with words, which is why he hired this prophet. His name was Bilam. Bilam, and we'll read about him in the Torah in like 4 weeks' time, and he was the one that was hired to curse the Jews, and he very much wanted to curse the Jews, but he knew that he couldn't utter a syllable that was not authorized by God. So it's from when he opened his mouth each time, instead of the curses came out blessings, and it's from the richness of the blessings that we can tell the intensity of the intended curses. Without getting into it too much, but these are great blessings. That because there was a pendulum, God switched them, right? But these great blessings are some of the greatest blessings of the entire Torah in the portion of Balak. And it's enigmatic because we realize how goodly are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. Let's talk about the literal interpretation of this verse, okay? Literal interpretation of this verse is like this, is that the Jewish people were camped, as we read about in the portion of the Torah in recent weeks. As they traveled in formation. It wasn't like a Chinese fire drill. They traveled in formation. In the middle of the camp was the Holy Ark of the Covenant. And the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Around that on all four sides were three families of the Levites, and the fourth side was Moses and Aaron. Then around the middle camp was on all four sides was the 12 tribes of Israel, 3 tribes on each side. And they traveled in this formation through the desert. Now they're coming to the promised land. They went the long route, right? They went from Egypt and they came in through like Syria side, right? Through the Golan Heights. So there, the Balak, the king of like Jordan area, comes to bring Bilam to the mountaintop, where he shows him the people so that he can curse them. As he views them from the top of the mountain, he notices that their tents are built in a very modest way, that the tents are built in such a way that nobody could see into the tent of the other person, because they were in rows, in neat rows. The opening of your tent would see the back of the tent of the next person. So no two tents are facing each other. So you couldn't sit in your tent and peep as a peeping Tom into what's going on in the next tent. So that's what he meant on a very literal interpretation of the verse. How goodly are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. And what he meant to say was what he was effectively saying here was that the Jewish people are camped in an orderly fashion. Yeah. But the verse doesn't really make sense to us. Why? Because what is he saying? It sounds like poetry. Why is he referring to 2 names, Jacob and Israel? And that's what this discourse is all about. This discourse is going to talk to us about the significance of our name. Do you know what your name is? What's your name? Yeah. Chanarezel. Now, Chanarezel is a name that was given to you by your parents who experienced miniature divine prophecy about your destiny. Why they chose Chanarezel and not Penina is because they were drawn to this name, which carries within it the key, the code to your destiny. Our name, are you familiar with this concept?
Yeah, I'm named after my mother's grandmother, and my mother promised my grandmother, her grandmother, that
all of that was divine. All of that was
me.
Divine providence. Nothing was by coincidence. Nothing is by coincidence. All of that's divine providence, which means that the reason why you were the one born, I was supposed to have a girl's name.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because my great grandmother passed away 6 months before I was born. Problem is, I was a boy, so they gave me a different name. And my next sibling, my sister, received that name. So it's everything by divine providence. Who gets which name? The idea is like this. Just like your email address reaches you, and my email address reaches me. The letters of your name are a code that reaches a certain destination. It's like a recipe. Think of each letter as an ingredient. Each letter. What's your Hebrew name, Chuck? Tzvi. So you have 3 letters in your Hebrew name. It's my second name. You have 3 letters. Those 3 letters, think of it like a recipe. And when you put it together, or like a chemical equation. Hydrogen plus oxygen plus a little sulfur creates sulfuric acid, right? But you throw a little chlorine, a little sodium, becomes something else, right? So think about it like a chemical equation. Each letter creates your personality and leads to your destiny. This is the reason why when somebody is ill, what we do is that we add a name to them in order to alter the destiny of that person. So if they don't have enough health resources in their name, we give them a name like Chaim or Chaya, which means life, or Rachamim or Ruchama, which means mercy, in order to give them an extra dose, an extra oomph of healing.
Part of a prayer that goes with it, because destiny is changed by God, not by.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So this is the significance of a name. Now, when we look at our own names and we look at the names that we choose to give our children, and we are validated by the awareness that the names that we chose for our children are miniature prophecies that we all experience, because we don't really know why we gave that name. We just are drawn towards them. But our affinity and rapport with a particular name is because our soul senses the destiny of that child. Right? That being said, we now have to understand the collective name of our people. What is the name of our nation? Israel. Is that the only name of our nation?
Ivri.
No, Yaakov is our name too.
Oh.
Our name is both Yaakov and Israel. How do I know? Because look, it says it in the verse. How goodly are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling place is Israel. Now you'll notice that when it comes to this name, who changed the name of Jacob? Now this is a story in Genesis where Jacob was grappling with an angel. It's in the portion of Vayishlach. It's a beautiful story. Jacob was married to 4 wives, Rachel and Leah, Bilhah and Zilpah, and he had already 11 children. And he was about to face his demon, face his nemesis, his brother Esau, who was trying to kill him for already 30-something years. And the night before the showdown, the Torah tells us that Jacob grapples with a mysterious stranger all night long, an angel. And the Torah tells us that at the end of this grappling all night long with a stranger, what would you do if you were trying to go home to your wife and kids, and somebody stops you in a dark alleyway and he beats you up all night long? What would you do if in the morning he says, "Sorry, I gotta go"? What would you do?
I'll give you whatever you want.
He says, "I gotta leave. Do you mind if I leave?" What would you say to him if you said it? Do you mind if I leave?
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I'm not gonna miss you. Good riddance, right? Jacob says to this mysterious angel, who was beating him up all night, "I'm not going to let you go until you bless me." Little odd thing to say to somebody who beats you up, right? So he says, "Okay, here's the blessing. The blessing is going to change your name from Jacob to Israel." The word Jacob, and this is very, very important for our understanding of this discourse. The word Jacob was given to him when he was born. Why was it given to him when he was born? Because Jacob was a twin. He was the younger of the twins. Esau was his older brother. Esau, the evil, and Jacob was the Jew, right? He was the righteous one. He was grasping the heel of his older brother. So they called him Yaakov because Yaakov comes from the root Ekev, which means heel. Because he was a heel. He was like holding on, trying to live in the shadow of his older brother. That's why he got the name Jacob. The name Israel, he said, I'm changing your name from Jacob to Israel. And now you can read this in the Torah, in the Bible, which is right behind me, and you should read it. It's a great story. It's important to understand, to have a breadth of knowledge in your wisdom of Torah. He calls him, he says, "For no longer will you be called Jacob," which means a heel, a follower, a victim mentality. From now on, you're going to be called Yisrael. Yisrael. What does Yisrael mean? Kisarita im Elokim ve'im anashim vatuchal. For you have grappled with men and angels or princes, and you have prevailed. He was shifting him from Jacob to Israel, representing the shift from victim to victor, from follower mentality to leader mentality, leader mindset, right? And this is the difference between Jacob and Israel. Jacob is the Jew who's kvetching, who's complaining. Life is so difficult to be a Jew, fearful. Israel is the Jew who's joyous. Everything is good. Ivy Zis as to Zayin Ayid. Oh, how sweet it is to be a Jew. You know, the Jacob Jew is the one that's always going to the learning about the Holocaust, and everything Jewish is about the Holocaust, and it's all about dead Jews. The Israel Jew walks with his head up high, and he's never afraid of anti-Semitism. The Jacob Jew is the nail. The Israel Jew is the hammer. When it comes to anti-Semitism, what's your worldview? Are you a nail or a hammer? Is your anti-Semitism approach all reactive? Then you're a nail. If it's proactive, you're a hammer. Right? Jacob waits for things to happen. Israel makes things happen. These are the two names. Now, one would think that this is a great upgrade. You know, this is a very nice upgrade we just got from this mysterious angel. Later on in the Torah, God actually ratifies this particular name change explicitly. But you think, okay, out with the old, in with the new, right? You know, if imagine you're renovating your house, right? So you rip out the old kitchen and you put in the new one, right? What are you gonna do with the old kitchen? Get the heck out of here. Good riddance. I don't want to ever see you again. But imagine you stored it over there, like next to the new kitchen, so you'd have a memory of the old kitchen. No, thank you. Not interested. Goodbye. So why then are we still using the name Jacob? Why is it that we Jews are going by this second name? We're both Israel and Jacob. Let's take a look at this in the Maimer. Okay, page 225. Ohel means covering of a tent, while Mishkan refers to the actual dwelling place, the interior. In the verse, it talks about your tents, Ohel, Jacob, your dwelling places, Mishkan, Yisrael, right? So there's a difference. What's going on in this verse? It talks about a tent. The dwelling, the Mishkan is the actual dwelling place. The verse that states, Hagudli are the covering of your tents, Jacob, the insides of your tents, Israel. So right there, we're stuck. What is he talking about? Jacob is connected to the covering of the tent. Israel is connected to the inside of the tent. The Gemara states as follows in Tractate Brachos. By the way, someone else whose name was changed was Abraham. Abraham, his name was Avram. Avram comes to God and he says, God, listen, I know you promised me a kid and everything. He was 99 years old. He says, I know you promised me a child, but I've seen in the stars, in astrology, that I'm not having no kids. It says in the stars, you see? So God says to him, Avram doesn't have kids. But guess what? You're not Avram anymore. You're now Avraham. He changes his name. God changes his name. You change your name, you change your mazel, right? Just like the person that's sick, that needs more healing. You change your name, you change your fertility. So that's what happens to Avram. His name gets changed to Avraham, right? Full replacement, a whole new person. So God is like, if you move the goalposts, then it's a different game, right? So now God says, okay, now you're gonna have a kid, right? So the Gemara states, he who calls Avraham by the name Avram transgresses the verse. You will no longer be called Avram. That's what it says in the Gemara. You're not allowed to call Abram anymore. Once his name was changed by God from Avram to Avraham, you're not allowed to go back to the original name. That's what it says in the Gemara. The Gemara then asks, if this is so, then why doesn't one who calls Yisrael by his previous name Jacob transgress the same verse? You will no longer be called Jacob. The Torah itself continues to call him Jacob and Israel at random, seemingly at random. After this discourse, here's what's going to happen. After this discourse, you'll realize that every single time in Torah that the name Jacob is mentioned, it's talking about a certain kind of Jew. And every time the name Israel is mentioned, it's talking about a different kind of Jew. So this is going to change our understanding of, you're going to have to restudy the whole Torah again now, because what's going to happen is that every time we're referenced, the question is, who is being referenced? Kind of like we did in Viadaita Moskova, when we studied the names of God, where we learned about Havaya and Elohim, and we realized that the various names of God, in English, the Lord, God, whatever, it seems like just a bunch of, useless words. But in Hebrew, it's Havaya and Elohim. They're talking about two exceptionally different and unique energies. When we talk about Havaya, we're talking about God's infinite ability. When we're talking about Elohim, we're talking about God, the way he has subjected himself to the rules that he created, like nature and math and science and space and astrology, right? These are the rules that he created. So when it's talking about Elohim, it's talking about Havaya, it's talking about two entirely different personalities.
So similar to the sexes, we refer to women as they.
Women are often called Bet Yaakov. Are men called Yisrael? I'm not ready to say that. I don't believe that I've seen the men specifically as a gender referred to as Yisrael, but yes, the women certainly have been called Bet Yaakov. Okay, so the Gemara answers that the names Yaakov and Avraham are different. That's how the Gemara answers. Once God gave Avraham the name Avraham. The name Avraham is never again mentioned in the Torah. And whoever calls Avraham by his original name violates a negative precept. But even after God gave Jacob the name Yisrael, we find references to the name Yaakov as well. Does that answer the question? Nope. It just kicks the can down the road. Because it says, so God continues to call him Yisrael, Yaakov, but God doesn't, and discontinued the name Avram. Okay, so why? That's the question I'm going to leave you with today. We must understand the difference between Avram and Yaakov. Especially in light of the fact that identical expressions are used with regard to both of them. You will no longer be called this name, and you'll no longer be called that name. It says exactly the same precept. Also, what is the difference between the name Avraham, the new name Avraham, and Yisrael, the new name? That Avraham must be called by the name Avraham, while Yisrael may be called either Yisrael or Yaakov. And with this, I'm going to end it over here. Ron, what were you going to say?
Is not the implication here that we are Israel, the people of the other side. We are the people of the other side.
I think you're talking about something else. You're talking about Ivri. That's a different concept. Gibb says, I noticed about a year ago that my last name's letters rearranged can spell mind heart. I thought that was really cool. So mind heart. Interesting. I just want you to know that that's in English. We're talking now in Hebrew, Gibb, which is Hebrew is like a whole different language. It's called the Holy Tongue. And the way that your name is in Hebrew is specific. But other languages that are not Hebrew are more social consensus than essence meaning, right? So, for example, the name of everything in Hebrew is related to its essence and its core, as we discussed earlier. But the name of anything in English is meaningless. Like if your name is Tracy or Stacy, it doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't mean anything. But in Hebrew, the name is very, very unique and specific to your soul destiny. Suffice it to that. We'll carry on, God willing, maybe Thursday, maybe Tuesday. We'll do. I'm going to try to figure out how often I want to do this, but we'll carry this on at least once a week to keep up the discourses of this and Tanya. We'll be just incorporating a lot more Torah study over here. This is my goal. All right, send me always emails. I'd love to hear from you. Rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's Rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Thank you very much and have a lovely day. Thank you.